The Legal Mindset Corner will begin after a brief word from today's sponsor, Answering Legal. Visit answerinlegal.com to learn more about our 24/7 virtual receptionist team.
Answering Legal has helped us set boundaries and be able to establish a better work-life balance in the information that they collect. Knowing that Answering Legal is handling all the calls that are coming in has really helped reduce stress that I feel outside of work. So I know that the calls are being answered. I know we have the information we need to prioritize these calls, and I'm able to enjoy time with my family. I would absolutely recommend Answering Legal to other attorneys. It really helps with the work-life balance.
Welcome back to the Legal Mindset Corner, sponsored by our friends at Answering Legal. Now, my co-host, Becky Howlett, and I, Cynthia Sharp, are devoted to exploring a range of topics that impact lawyer well-being, and that includes mindfulness, work-life integration, digital communication, resilience, healthy communication, and much more. Today, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Larry Richard, founder of LawyerBrain. He is recognized as the leading expert on the psychology of lawyer behavior. He is frequent author, frequent speaker, and obviously a very popular podcast guest. I saw once reviewing his LinkedIn profile. And his main area of expertise is in positive psychology and applied behavioral science in helping lawyers succeed. He's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and I love that because I'm sitting here in Philadelphia right now. And Dr. Richard practiced law as a trial attorney for 10 years, so he's been in the trenches. He then went on to earn a PhD in psychology from Temple University, and in 2011, he established his own consulting firm, LawyerBrain LLC, where his focus is on improving lawyer performance through personality science. For more than 20 years, he has gathered personality data on thousands of lawyers and advised dozens of AmLaw 200 law firms, where again, his focus is on resilience, change management, leadership, and talent issues. Larry, thank you so much for joining us here today. And let's just jump right in. The name LawyerBrain is very intriguing to me. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it and what led you to create this organization?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very lovely introduction, Cynthia. I may have to use that for all of my other presentations going forward, because it was so enthusiastic. So thank you again for that. And thank you both, Cynthia and Becky, for inviting me today. So believe it or not, all of the years that I've been doing these interviews, podcasts, and so forth, no one has asked me that question. So I'm glad you asked it, and I'll tell you the backstory. I was working for Hildebrandt, which was the largest and most widely known specialty consultancy for the legal profession. And I was with them for 7 years. They were bought out by Thomson Reuters, and so we suddenly we're part of a big family. And then after the 2007 and 8 recession, Thomson Reuters started changing its strategies more toward technology, scalable businesses that were electronically based. And Hildebrandt is a consulting firm, individual human beings that bill by the hour. And that's not the same model, the same business model that Thomson Reuters was evolving towards. So they amicably decided to go separate directions. And when the handwriting was on the wall, many of us who were partners at Hildebrandt either spun off another firm. A lot of my friends created a thing called Law Vision. Shout out to Law Vision folks. And some of us went on our own, like myself. and I created LawyerBrain in 2011. I have been doing, it was really to just continue the work that I've been doing since I started my career, which is helping large law firms on people issues by applying the research that I've done on the personality traits of lawyers, because in my experience, the science shows us that lawyers are really different from other people, really similar to each other, and the qualities that make us different from others help us to be really good at practicing high quality law. Yet at the same time, those same traits pose some challenges, including the challenges we're going to talk about today to well-being, mental health challenges, and so forth. But they also affect leadership and followership. They affect diversity and mainly inclusion. They affect teams. They affect engagement at work. They affect all kinds of things. So if you understand personality, you already have a key to the kingdom that helps you understand just about every aspect of lawyer behavior in both the substantive side of the house and the business of law side of the house. So it's a lot.
Well, yes, this is and I do want to say that we're really thrilled that you're working at the organizational level, because throughout Becky and I have been together almost 4 years, and which I cannot even believe. And through our 4 years, we have focused by and large on what individuals can do to take care of their own mental health. And one of the comments we've received is, look, what about the organization? What is their responsibility? And so we're very happy to know that work is being done at that level.
And I do look at both sides, because you can't help anyone improve their life or any aspect of it without looking at both sides of the issue. One side is, what are the factors about me individually that I have control over? My personality, my values, my interests, my needs, my strengths, etc. There's a whole bunch of components that make up our identity. And then in the same breath, you have to look at the context. What kind of a firm am I in? What's the culture here? What is the leadership? What are the rules? What are the unwritten rules, the norms, and so forth? All of those things are very, very powerful in shaping behavior. And if I only fix the things that I control individually, and there are pressures in the institution that go in the opposite direction, for example, let's take the most classic example. Suppose you are the leader of a law firm and you really, really want your lawyers to work as a team or as teams. You know, each practice group works as a team and so forth. If you say, I'm going to give an inspirational speech to all of my lawyers at the next retreat, and I'm going to tell them why it's so important to work as a team, and I finish it and people stand up and they applaud, I go, bravo, this was a great speech, I'm inspired. Then they go back to the office, and what their culture surrounds them with is, you are getting rewarded, compensated individually for your performance. Here's a list of our top performers and their comp for this year. And you're looking at that and you're going, why should I cooperate with that guy when it's going to take money out of my pocket? So how do you get somebody to perform as a team player when you're rewarding them for being an individual performer? There's a famous article, I think it was in the Sloan Management Review, if I'm not mistaken, back in the 1990s. And the article was something like, on the folly of asking for A while rewarding B.
I love that. I love that.
So that's it in a nutshell. So you really have to look at both sides. What are the factors that the individual can manipulate, control, influence, shape? What are the factors that the leadership of the firm, the culture, can contribute to improvements?
I heard an interesting, I'm sorry, Becky, but I just want to interject. I heard an interesting definition of culture yesterday. It's the way we do things around here.
Exactly.
And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a famous one. I think that was Peter Drucker that basically coined that. Yeah,
That's it.
the way we do things around here. Mm-hmm.
And we just love your business. But I want to call you Dr. Larry. I don't know if that's because I watched like Dr. Phil as a child, but I'm like, Dr. Larry. Do you go by
Sure.
Larry, Dr. Richard? What do you prefer?
So my dad used to say, call me anything you want but late for dinner. So I follow that philosophy. People call me Dr. Richard, Dr. Larry, Dr. Larry, Lar, any of the above. But speaking of the name of the company, when I first founded LawyerBrain, the reason I picked that label is I was thinking about my expertise is in understanding the brains of lawyers, not as a neurologist or as a biologist, but understanding behaviorally. What is it that our training and our brains and our thinking do that help us excel and also pose some problems? So the brain of a lawyer is kind of my focal area. So I had some T-shirts made up that said Lawyer Brain on the back of the T-shirt. And I walked into my local supermarket and I feel a tap on my shoulder and I turn around and there's this older woman who I'd never met. And she says, "Excuse me, young man, but is that curable?" And I think she was dead serious. I had no idea. I was speechless. I had no idea how to respond to that.
So you founded a company as well as a new medical diagnosis.
Apparently so, then. Apparently so.
But we just love that your company is based on data, and also you were totally, I feel like, on the cutting edge when you at the time you founded this in 2011. I know in the work we do, and just going back to my own legal training, I think about how kind of underplayed the quote unquote soft skills were, even though we know how valuable and how intrinsic they are to being successful as attorneys. So Dr. Larry, I would love to hear, you were saying that you've really identified there's an overarching profile. There's a set of characteristics that a lot of attorneys share. I would love to delve into that. Sure.
So over the years, starting in the 1990s, I started studying personality in the 80s, and I was still practicing law then. But in the 90s, I had finished my training as a PhD and was preparing to do my doctoral research. And I decided that I would study the personality traits of lawyers. So I did, and I was very fortunate to get the support of the American Bar Association. They actually endorsed my study and gave me a printout of a randomly selected cross-section of all U.S. lawyers. So I was able to do a statistically valid sampling of all U.S. lawyers, over 3,000 people I sent out surveys to. And what I discovered, I was looking to see if personality affected the level of job dissatisfaction, because at the time I did the study, lawyers were overworked. A little bit of a backstory. In 1975, prior to 75, the way law was practiced is very what they called, no gender slurs intended, they called it gentlemanly. And what was meant by that term back then was you do the legal work, your focus is on getting the right solution for the client. I don't even want to bring it up, but I would like to be paid for all this effort that I put in. So if it doesn't, if it's not too much, Mr. or Ms. Client, I'm going to send you a bill. And the bill would simply say, for services rendered, dollar amount. They wouldn't itemize it. They wouldn't say anything about time. It's just, what do I think this is worth? What did I put in? Now, there were certain legal matters that were standardized, mainly what we call consumer law, things that individuals avail themselves of for, with lawyers. So making a will, sadly getting a divorce, buying a house, doing a closing, filing a bankruptcy. Those common issues were so recurring that lawyers, bar associations got together and agreed on what should a lawyer charge to take the stress out of the moment where you have a fee discussion with a client. They just said, we're going to create what they called a minimum fee schedule. And it listed, like you go into Domino's and it says, one plain pizza, so much, anchovies, so much extra. You want shrimp on it, it's an extra charge for that, extra cheese. And it was like that. So, here's what a will costs, here's what a divorce costs. And that was fine for many years until somebody felt aggrieved by the fact that they couldn't get a better price when they shopped around different lawyers in Arlington, Virginia, and they filed a lawsuit. And they said, this agreement of all the lawyers that I'm talking to charge me the exact same price, that flies in the face of a principle of American law codified by the Sherman Antitrust Act. It's antitrust. And the lawyers laughed them out of court and said, oh, that's silly. Lawyers aren't subject to antitrust. We're lawyers. We wrote the laws. They don't apply to us. And the courts agreed with the lawyers. They threw the plaintiff out of court. But this plaintiff would not be deterred. And believe it or not, they appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court granted certiorari, and they decided to reverse the lower court and declared that the minimum fee schedule was, in fact, a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which was like a tsunami when it hit the legal profession.
Wow.
And suddenly, lawyers couldn't charge a flat fee. I mean, they couldn't charge a fee schedule fee. So they had to come up with some other way of computing what they charged. And some lawyers had been using a method of keeping track of their time. And suddenly, time billing became like the de facto, what do we do now type of default. It's what they started using. And because they were so eager to just put the whole thing behind them, it became automated and everybody started using it. And now it's generations who have used it. And if you look in the trade literature, there are dozens and dozens of points over the last 40 years, I'll say, when, activists have tried to wean lawyers off of the billable hour. But both lawyers and their clients are kind of addicted to it, and it's very, very hard to change. So why am I telling you all of that? Because when I first started, why am I telling you that? I've completely lost sight of why I put that on the table. Does anyone remember the question that you asked me that triggered this reverie of minimum fee schedule?
Yeah. So also, what a fascinating history. I didn't know that.
Okay.
And now I want to look up who that plaintiff was and right there just sentence a heated letter about, you ruined all of the trans lives at the bill.
All right, I'll make it easy. The plaintiff's name was Goldfarb. I don't remember the first name. But it was Goldfarb versus State Bar of Virginia. Anyway, you asked about the lawyer personality. So I started by surveying lawyers' personalities for my doctoral research. And what I was interested in was mainly, does it affect job satisfaction? But when I looked at the data and I saw that the people who were scoring on this I was using the Myers-Briggs as my test tool. Mm-hmm. And I looked at the data, and the typical lawyer scores were really atypical compared to the general public and very much like each other. So if you know the Myers-Briggs, mm-hmm. There's a common, the last two traits are thinker, feeler, and judger, perceiver, abbreviated TF and JP. Mm-hmm. And it's, if you combine thinking and judging, only about 19% of the public in the U.S. have a TJ combination. 19%. What percent of lawyers have a TJ combination? 50%. I'm going to guess. 50.
Oh, wow.
50%. 2.5 times the number of the general public. I mean, that's just so lopsided. You never see anything like that in statistical data. And I looked at
Cindy,
those numbers
what's your Myers-Briggs? Let's put this to the test. I know you've taken it in the past.
It's been so many years. It's probably been over 40 years ago that I took it. So I
remember when I took it in college, when I was like looking for what am I going to do, because I had mentally decided, well, it's easier to just stay in bed and sleep than go to class and sleep through all of my chemistry classes. I was like pre-pharmacy. I was like, this isn't working. So I went to the Career Center and took a long-form personality test, including Myers-Briggs. And to your point, Dr. Larry, I remember I was ESTJ.
Yep. Yeah. And the E part probably was why spending all day reading chemistry books is not the preferred way that an E spends their time. So I looked at this data, and suddenly, instantaneously, I was much more interested in personality than I was in the career stuff. And I started looking, and then 2 years after I earned my PhD in the early 90s, there was some serious scholarly debates about the validity of the Myers-Briggs. And it was criticized correctly for having very poor validity and reliability numbers, especially if it were to be used as a predictive tool. Now, there are a lot of things that you can still do with it, and I still use it, for things like helping people understand each other and that sort of thing, but not where the precision of the assigned personality trait matters. When it's a trigger of a discussion, great. But if it's to try to predict something that's going to matter for somebody, it's not a good tool. So I wanted a more heavy-duty industrial strength personality tool. And I took them all myself. I tried them out in the 90s, and I discovered that Caliper not only was one of the most accurate, statistically valid, reliable, heavy-duty tests, but when I gave it to a few lawyers and tried several other tests at the same time, they liked it better too, because it made sense. The labels made sense. The traits that it measured aligned with the way they thought. And so I started using the Caliper, and I've now amassed thousands and thousands of measures of lawyers with this test. And just as with the Myers-Briggs, the way lawyers score on this test is dramatically different from the way the general public scores. So Caliper has 21 independent personality traits that it measures that are all used by people in the workplace. And every trait is measured on a 0 to 100% scale, a percentile scale. A percentile basically tells us when you get a score on your trait. So, for example, I have a trait called high urgency. It's one of the 21 scales is called urgency. You can get anywhere from a 1 to a 99. They won't let you have a 0 or 100. They're just kind of the endpoints. So you could get anywhere from a 1 to a 99. Most people score in the middle, but I got a 99. And I'm looking at my 99. I'm going, does this mean like I need to be put in a straitjacket? Is there something wrong with me? And the psychologist said, no, to the contrary, a high score means you're really clear. You're really confident about what you prefer on this trait. The higher your score, the more clarity your score. Same thing with really low scores. You're really clear. You don't identify with this trait. You do actually the opposite. So I had a 99 urgency. I am very impatient. I may finish other people's sentences and so forth. I'm urgent. So understanding that, I started the psychologist giving me the feedback, went through all of the scores, and she gave me my score on autonomy, and she gave me my score on assertiveness and aggressiveness, and we go down the alphabet. We get to a trait called resilience. And to this point, I am loving this test. I am telling her, Joanne, this is like the most accurate thing I've ever had feedback on. This is such a great test. I can't believe it. And then she says, resilience, you got a 19%. And I said, what? That must be a mistake. You can't be telling me I got a 19. And I went off like some sort of a lunatic for 15, 20 minutes about why this couldn't be so. And I'm a psychologist and this trait can't be right. And this whole test stinks. And she says, I thought you were telling me this was a great test. Well, it is, but this can't be right. And then I ran out of things to say. And I said, can you remind me, what does this resilience trait measure? Well, she said, instead of giving you a definition, I'm just going to say, think back to everything you've been saying to me for the last 20 minutes. That's low resilience. Ouch. She had me. It was like cornered, a rat in a maze. And at that point, I realized, she's actually right, because I am very defensive. I felt very wounded by getting that score. And it turns out I've now, like I said, tested thousands of lawyers, and so many of them are low in resilience, and they all have the same reaction I had. And I tell them, look, when you feel bad about getting this score, it is validation that the score is correct. Now that hurts, but it's very accurate. So what are the 7 outlier traits? So to put it in context, because every trait can have 0 to 100, you can get, like I said, anyone between 1 and 99. But if you took all of an occupation, let's say, forget lawyers for a moment. Let's say we took all accountants. You measure all accountants, they're going to have scores ranging all over the map, 1 to 99. But the highs and lows will cancel out, and you're going to get an average somewhere in the middle. The larger number of people you measure, the more it's going to be exactly at 50%. The smaller the group, there's more slippage. It could be 45 or 57, but it's going to be in the middle. Averages are always in the middle when you're dealing with bell curve data. So you would be surprised, and for Caliper, there's what they call the standard deviation, the kind of the goalposts in that middle set of scores. So any occupation is going to have an average between 40 and 60% for literally every single one of the 21 traits. That's the average for the occupation. There's one occupation that just does not fit: us.
Wow.
Lawyers not only have 1, not 2, but 7 of the 21 traits average below 40 or above 60. Wow. That is just stunning. I've never seen anything in any published data of any other occupation that even comes close to the degree of outlier status, the magnitude of the outlierish qualities that we lawyers have. So when, every occupation says, we're unique, we're different. But lawyers really are. We have the data to prove it. We're just not like other people. So what are these 7 traits? Number 1, and by the way, urgency is one of the 7 traits. So urgency is one of the outlier traits. We're more impatient than other people, which is a good thing because our clients come to us with very pressing problems and they need them solved immediately. So it stands to reason, it makes perfect sense that people with an impatient personality would find it comfortable to enter this profession. Number 2, we're very high in a trait called abstract reasoning. We like analyzing things. We like problem solving. We like arguing. We're data geeks. Number 3, we're very high in a trait called autonomy. Actually, Caliper, this is kind of complex. Caliper calls it external structure. Low external structure is the same as high autonomy, but I call it high autonomy to make it easy. We don't like people telling us what to do. Most people don't like being told what to do, but lawyers take it to an art form. So a 50% autonomy would be pretty much don't tell me what to do. The average for lawyers is 71%, and that's more like, you talking to me? You want to cross this line? You want me to turn in my what? By when? Right? So autonomy. Number 4, lawyers are incredibly high in skepticism. It's actually their most outlier trait. Remember, the public averages at 50%. The average skepticism for lawyers is 90%. 90%. And when I tell this to groups of lawyers, usually partners, there's always some joker in the crowd that yells out, "Yeah, right." So,
and then you go, point.
Now, here's the thing. Skepticism is what we're trained in law school to use. We're trained to think like lawyers. Plus, people with already high skepticism scores enter law school in a disproportionate numbers. So you get a group of people who are already skeptical. Now they're being trained to be even more skeptical. Then they graduate and become lawyers, and every day of their practice, they're using this skill and they're thinking skeptically. They're thinking glass half empty. And so it reinforces it. And by the time you get to partner after 10 years of practicing, 3 years of law school, it's no wonder they're up at 90% as an average. I've had law firms where I tested every partner and the averages were above 90%. It's stunning. So high skepticism. And we'll get back into this in a minute because I think I mentioned to you guys that I've just finished writing a book for the American Bar Association about lawyer resilience. Why is it so low and what can be done about it? And skepticism is one of the factors that keeps our resilience low.
Ooh.
So we'll talk about that. So those are the 4 high traits. What are the low lawyer traits? We're low in a trait called sociability. Sociability, when it's high, would be somebody who's comfortable with emotional vulnerability. I share the deeper parts of myself so that I can increase our trust in each other and build connections. Now, that sentence itself would be taken out and shot by most lawyers. I mean, it's seen as a touchy-feely, woo-woo type of sentence. Because we're talking about intimacy and vulnerability and connection and trust, and they're rolling their eyeballs and looking for the exit, which is unfortunate because the science tells us that the lawyers are wrong and the science is right, that human connection is one of the most important things for a life well lived. So, we dismiss it and roll our eyeballs at our own expense, which is very sad. But sociability is important. The higher your score, the more naturally inclined you are to tune into other people, share yourself with them, remember the details of their life, make the relationship components important as opposed to the superficial things. Really kind of tune in and be authentic. That's sociability. A low score is somebody who's very guarded and private and doesn't let you see their emotions or their inner self. There are extroverted, low sociability people. So extroversion is a separate trait from sociability. So if I'm extroverted and low in sociability, I'm going to have a beer with you and have a lot of fun and tell a lot of jokes, and we'll go to a game and, enjoy some sport. But at the end of the day, you'll have no insight about my private life, my fears, my, personal concerns, my idiosyncrasies. None of that's on the table. So the public's at 50%. Where are lawyers? The average sociability score is 12.5%.
Oh, no.
And that is with rainmakers included in the data. I've partialed out the rainmakers, and without the rainmakers in there, it drops from 12.5 down to 7%. A block of wood is 8% on sociability. So we're low. We're low in sociability. The 6th trait is the newest trait on the block. All of the other 6 traits that I'm talking about, the 5 I've mentioned and the 1 that's yet to be mentioned, those are all outliers that haven't changed at all in close to 30 years. This next one is cognitive empathy, taking the perspective of others. It's not the same as emotional empathy, where I feel sympathy for you because your dog died or that sort of thing. Cognitive empathy is I take your perspective and I take you and your needs into account, When I'm speaking or acting in your presence, I spend time making your world important and caring about what happens to you and thinking about you in an accurate way. That's cognitive empathy. And this was always low for lawyers, but the average was still within the goalposts of 40 to 60%. How close? 41%, just barely. But over the last 5 years, this has been dropping precipitously. It's now steadily at 38%, which makes it an outlier trait, and it's still dropping. The dropping is mainly being driven by millennials, people age 40 and younger, and it's not just the legal profession. Empathy has been dropping around the world for over 10 years. It's just a steady decline in empathy. So lawyers are very low in that, and it's unfortunate because it's becoming more important and more needed as we go through change and uncertainty. Perspective taking becomes much more important in the kind of world that we live in a world of change and uncertainty. So the need for empathy is getting greater, and the capacity to deliver it is getting lower. Not a good combination. The final trait, the most important trait, is the one I wrote the book about, and that is resilience. So what is resilience? Resilience as a personality trait is a little different from the word that we think of in general conversation. When I say resilience, or some people call it resiliency, resilience is thought of as the quality that people have who recover from traumatic events. So you're in a car crash, or you get COVID, or you're in a flood or a fire, and you dig deep and find the resources you need to pull yourself back up. Part of that might be personality, part might be social support, part might be government aid, part might be getting information from resources. There's a whole bunch of resources we call upon in a time of reacting to a traumatic event. Those are usually one-off events. They're not that common, and they require all these resources. Resilience as a personality trait may or may not have a role in that recovery from trauma scenario, but there's no research that I've ever found that tells us whether the resilience, the personality trait, is connected. When we talk about let's just shine the spotlight on resilience as a trait, what it is really concerned with, by contrast, is how do people react when they are in interpersonal interactions? How do they react when they're criticized, for example, when they're rejected, omitted from a meeting they should have been in? How do they react when they made a mistake that affects other people? How do they react when someone forgets their birthday? These are interpersonal responses to perceived slights of some sort. High resilience people either don't react negatively at all, or they react fleetingly. They get over it quickly, they bounce back. Low resilience people are hypersensitive. We not only react much bigger, disproportionately, we actually distort. Someone says, I don't like the way you wrote this report, and the low resilience person hears, you are deficient. It's not a criticism of the report. My whole identity has now been attacked, and I feel defensive and wounded. So we distort, enlarge, catastrophize. We tend to be hypersensitive. We tend to be insecure. We tend to be defensive. And it takes a long time to recover. We sulk, we ruminate. So that's the low resilience personality. Like every other trait on the caliper, in the general population, it's a bell curve with the average at 50. The average for lawyers is 20% lower, so we average at 30%. But that doesn't tell the whole story. All of the other 6 traits in the 7-trait outlier group, all of the other 6 traits are above or below 50%, or above or below 40 to 60, because the whole bell curve just moves. So low sociability, that 12.5% looks like a classic bell curve, just as many people on the right side of it as the left side of the middle. Urgency, 71%, just as many people above 71 as below 71. Resilience is different. It's called a skewed distribution. The bell curve actually gets pushed as if somebody took a mountain and squished it to the bottom side. 9 out of 10 lawyers are low in resilience. 9 out of 10 lawyers have a score below the 50th percentile. There's no other statistic in the literature that I've been able to find that even comes close to that. And in all the studies that I've done of personality over the years, this is the most consistent. The standard deviation is the narrowest. If it's, any time I measure it, if it's above 31 or below 29, that would be shocking. It stays in this narrow range. It's always low. I've looked back at a couple of projects I've done. I did an insurance company where we tested 200 some lawyers in the law department. I did a law firm last year where we had 200 plus partners that we tested. In both of those examples, the average resilience score for both huge groups was within fractions of a point of 30%. It just always ends up being in that 30% range. So we're just a group of really thin-skinned people. 9 out of 10 of us are thin-skinned. And most lawyers, their initial reaction is, well, I hope that's not me. If you're thinking, I hope it's not me, you're in the 90%. Just take it from me, you're in the 90%. If your reaction is, who cares, you're probably in the 10%. If you care, you're almost certainly in the 90%. So why is this important? Because low resilience affects everything.
Yes.
You see it when lawyers are bickering over comp. Well, I should have gotten credit for this. I helped originate that. No, you didn't. It shows up in feedback. Let me give you feedback. Well, it's all, take the classic case of the associate who thinks he or she is up for partnership after 8, 9, 10 years of apprenticeship, because this associate's gotten fabulous reviews for all of their tenure, and suddenly they say, oh, you're not up for partnership. In fact, you're not even on track. And they're like, what do you mean? You've given me nothing but glowing reports. Well, we probably left out a few things. Why would low resilience people not tell the truth? Because not only are low resilience people sensitive to being criticized, but we don't want to give criticism lest it backfires and we get criticized because of the reaction of the criticized person. The only place that doesn't hold true, it's like a state of suspended animation, is when we're in our role of lawyer. Because lawyers are so confident about their practice specialty that if I'm, say, I was a litigator, so I can speak for litigators. If I go into court, there's a paid adversary whose job it is to mess up my case, to defeat me, to poke holes in what I do. Do I get low resilience and all boo-boo face that somebody's trying to criticize me? No, I think that poor jerk, let him or her try to just poke holes in my case. Good luck, Charlie, because my case is so airtight, nobody's going to, mess up my case. I have confidence, so I'm not going to act like a low resilience person. Where will you see it, though? Let's say I have a 10% score on resilience. I look like a 99 in the courtroom. As soon as I get back to the office and my AA is unhappy with how I treated her this afternoon, now I'm going to cave in. So it depends on the context. When we're confident because of our role as lawyers, we tend to look like high resilience people, but we're not really. So those are the 7 traits.
In terms of the confidence in the practice area, sometimes I wonder if that holds true uniformly. I practiced for 30 years. And I talked to a lot of lawyers, and I think that there are a lot of lawyers who have imposter syndrome, that they don't think that they're good enough, even in the area of practice. And so just playing that devil's advocate, here's what I saw in the litigation area. I saw a lot of people have their holsters on, fast shooters, but it didn't necessarily mean that they felt confident in their ability as an attorney, but they felt confident in their ability to be a bully.
So let me address that directly, Cindy. Lawyers, you've heard the expression, never let them see you sweat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when lawyers go into the courtroom or into a deposition or to, appear before a judge or an arbitrator or somebody for a motion, they're going to bring their best game. They're going to look confident in that courtroom. But inside is a different story. You can feel like an imposter, but hold it together and play the role, act the part. We're good actors, so we look like we're together, but then we tell our best friend, I feel like such a fraud. And our friend says, how can you say that? You're so good. No, you don't get it. I really am. I'm pulling the wool over their eyes. I'm a fraud. So you can look confident and act confident, but you can be really low in resilience. And low resilience, imposter syndrome, I haven't seen studies on this, so I don't have data on this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are married together as well.
I would think so.
Yeah.
As you were going through the low, well, both the high and the low, one of them, and we'll get back to resilience, but is that cognitive empathy really spoke to me, because my attitude is like when I practiced, it's what I was taught is, I was a tax lawyer by and large, is don't let the tax tail wag the dog. Meaning that I needed to be able to identify, to get into the heads of my clients in order to do a great job for them. And if I don't have this cognitive empathy and I'm not able to get into their heads, then easily, I don't know how these lawyers are doing a great job for their clients. They're accomplishing what they think that the client needs, as opposed to what the client wants you to accomplish.
Oh, you're absolutely right. In any practice area where you spend a lot of your time as a lawyer doing client counseling, obviously empathy, perspective taking is a very important part of it. Also, in certain practices like corporate practices that are more transactional, where you're doing a lot of negotiating or deals, where you see the same people across the table multiple times, you build relationship. And it's very important. Even though that's atypical for the profession, there are these pockets of practice where you start seeing atypical. They're not typical of the atypical qualities of lawyers. So I've seen some really high sociability corporate lawyers, but the rest of their colleagues are low in sociability. I've seen some high resilience trial lawyers, but the rest of their colleagues are low in resilience. So there are, we can examine this with a fine-tooth comb, but the problem, everybody always likes to ask me a lot of detailed questions like that. Unfortunately, the more if you have a binary question, are litigators high or low in resilience? That's binary. It's either yes or no. That we can answer statistically. We can look at the statistics and give you a fairly confident answer. But as soon as you say, what are the best practices for somebody with this kind of score? Well, the ABA lists like 40-some different practice areas. You'd have to have enough test subjects in each of those practice cells, and in order to run the statistics, suddenly you're doing scientific studies where the sample size balloons from a couple hundred people to thousands of people just to get the same level of statistical significance. So the more what we call outcome variables, the more kinds of things you want to compare, the harder it is to get a valid statistic to do the comparison. So we only can basically make very rudimentary statements like, all lawyers have these traits on average, or litigators and transactional lawyers. But once we start breaking it down into more than two categories, we start losing statistical power and we can't make any statements that are authoritative.
We got to plug your book. What is the name of this resilience book? We got to get a copy of that, Cynthia. These
Wonderful.
statistics blew my mind. I'm just sitting here like, oh my gosh, I want to tell everyone I know about this.
Wonderful. So let me tell you the official name of the book. It is called Thin-Skinned, Why Lawyers Are So Defensive and the New Science That Can Help, a handbook for raising lawyer well-being.
Well, I love the name. It certainly gives an ambitious promise. And so what, it's because I was sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, if I take the caliper test and I come up with that I've got these 7 traits that I'm consistent with the rest of lawyerdom, can I change? And I think by the title of your book, you're indicating that you can. So can you give us a few tips on how we can, as individuals and then as organizations, on how to effectuate this change?
Sure. So let's talk about first, the word change can be misleading because people always say, if I have, quote, the wrong personality trait, can I change my personality trait? That whole question should be thrown in the trash because, first of all, there is no such thing as a wrong personality trait. Every trait has advantages and disadvantages for certain things. Self-awareness is the key tool, the first of 2 key tools. If I understand my trait, so for example, my high urgency, great tool for moving initiatives forward, not a great tool for being a good listener. Well, I'm a psychologist. I need to be a good listener. I need to learn first that I have high urgency. So the first tool is self-awareness. My second tool is I can't change that because it's a lot of genetics that goes into those traits. There's a little bit of learning, but mostly genetics in most personality traits. How am I going to be less urgent when I need to be? And the answer is any trait can be dialed back or dialed up if you're vigilant about the trait. It's not the same as saying I changed my trait because it's like a rubber band. As soon as I stop being vigilant, boing, back comes the high urgency and I'm back in the races, right? But for a client session, I can be patient, take a breath, center myself, take in a meditative breath, and be there for my client. So any trait can be regulated, but first you have to have self-awareness and know what that trait is. And then secondly, you have to learn some skills of self-regulation. How do I dial back or dial up a trait? Now, there is some more good news. Of the 21 caliper traits, 18 of them follow the standard research on personality, which we used to say personality is half nature, half nurture, meaning partly genetic, partly learned. But that was before we made that statement, before we had data. Now we've got close to 30 years of studies of identical twins. And what these twin studies have shown us is that personality is much more genetic than learned. Yeah. Average around 75% genetic, 25% learned. So it's hard to change a trait that's 75% genetic, but it does, that 25% learned does give us the ability to regulate, to dial it back. Now, even a almost 100% genetic trait like extroversion, or what Caliper calls gregariousness, same thing. That's about 95% genetic. But even the strongest extrovert can still temper their extroversion if they really put their mind to it for brief periods of time. And even the most staunch introvert can tolerate loud dinner meetings with tables of 10 people all shouting so you can't hear each other, right? It's exhausting, it's depleting, but you can tolerate it for a higher purpose of communing with my partners or learning some valuable information from a client, whatever it is. So we can overcome that genetic tug, that rubber band tug of the personality. However, 3 of the traits, resilience, empathy, cognitive empathy, and skepticism, are more learned than genetic. Much more learned. We learn to be, we're born trusting. We learn to be skeptical over time. Empathy is perspective taking. Cognitive empathy uses a lot of skills that lawyering uses. If you're a good lawyer and you have a good intellect, you can apply that intellect to shift your perspective and reason what might be another person, what might they be thinking, how will my behavior affect them, how will what I say land. You can do those types of calculations. You just have to remind yourself to do it. So you can raise your empathy. And last but not least, resilience has both some biology and some learning. It's probably more than 50% learned. The biology can be influenced. So for example, there's some what they call animal studies that were done with mice in a lab about resilience that show the actual mechanism for low resilience. And even though there is a biological kind of sequence that occurs when a person feels low resilience, and we know what that biological sequence looks like, that doesn't mean you can't change that biological sequence by changing your thinking, by changing your patterns, by rehearsing. And in the book, I put all of these strategies that are all scientifically based about what a person can do individually to raise their resilience. The 2 biggest strategies, number 1 is social support. And number 2, well, it should be the other way around. Number 1 is changing your mindset. Mindset is underestimated in terms of its importance for your overall life experience. Your mindset is hugely impactful in the direct experience that you have, and it's specifically impactful in your resilience level. And if you change your mindset, it actually not only raises your resilience, but changes the biology underpinning the low resilience. And if you rehearse the new thinking patterns, you actually cement the new biology. You build neural pathways in your brain for these new biological processes that become automated and easier to, trigger off when there's a low resilience trigger, some sort of threat or, criticism, mistake, etc. Social support, when you have people that you're close to and you can lean on them and you can have a shoulder to cry on and you can have somebody who empathically understands you, it insulates you from having a low resilience reaction in the first place. And if you have one, that shoulder to cry on helps you recover much quicker than an isolated person suffering loneliness. So social support, very important. And then there's half a dozen other interventions that don't have as much science behind them, but still have some pretty good studies, and I cover them in the book. So there's a lot of stuff that people can use for themselves. The last chapter of the book is devoted to the institutional side of the picture. What can leaders in law firms do, or legal departments? What can they do to create a more resilience-friendly culture? Because if I do all this hard work as an individual and I raise my resilience and I'm in a sharp elbows firm where everybody's criticizing everybody else, what's the point?
And it would seem that first of all, in order to take advantage as an individual, to take advantage of the social support aspect, you have to be vulnerable enough or willing to have the courage to be vulnerable enough to seek a partner in this. And in the law firm setting, I can see where if you're hoping maybe people within your law firm will help out, that if you're in that sharp elbow atmosphere, that could be problematic and really set you back.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Let me just say a word. I know one of the topics that you headlined is well-being, and all of the stuff that we've talked about today is really closely connected to well-being. So think of well-being as, earlier in this conversation, I said your mindset is very important in affecting your outcomes, your experience in life. Nowhere is that more true than in the topic of well-being. I won't go so far as to say well-being is just a state of mind, but there is incredible research on your mindset that shows that it directly affects your physiology. So when you have, so I'll give you a couple of quick studies. One, there's a series of studies about stress. People who view stressful events as challenges. Oh boy, this is really going to be a good challenge. I bet I can do this. They get this feeling in their stomach, which they label excitement. The person who sees that same event and says, oh my God, I'm going to fail. This is stressful. What if I don't make it? What they label that same exact feeling is anxiety, butterflies in the stomach. It's the same physiology. They just label it differently. And that's all the difference, because when people have a positive mindset about those kinds of moderate, tolerable levels of stress, they don't experience it as stress. They experience it as challenge. So, and the toxic effects of stress mostly come to people who have the belief that stress is toxic.
Interesting.
So your mindset actually is a mediating variable. It affects whether the so-called stressors in the real environment hurt you or don't hurt you. The second example is there are some studies showing that, for example, when anesthetics or pain analgesics, pain relievers like morphine in the hospital, when they're administered to patients, the mindset of the patient influences the pain relief level that they enjoy. So if you tell, there was a study where they did it, they attached an automatic morphine pump to a patient. And in condition A, the patient was told, oh, you've got a morphine pump, and every time you need morphine, you're going to hit the button, and either the nurse will come in and administer it, or you'll hear a bell, and it will let you know that you got it. And they reported decrease in their pain when the morphine was administered. The second group was told there's a pump attached to you, and you don't need to know anything about it. It's automatic. It senses when you feel pain, and it'll pump the right amount out, and it'll relieve your pain. And they got no visit from a nurse, no bell. The first group had much better pain relief than the second group, the exact same dosage of the drug. Mindset really, really matters. Well-being is partly how we respond to stress. And the lawyer personality traits help us be good lawyers, but also make us more vulnerable to the effects of uncertainty and change. Those are stressful. Our brain's threat circuit is always looking for possible threats. And we're trained to look for threats even when there aren't real threats that other people would be sensitized to. So when there are real threats, we lawyers are hypersensitive, and we feel automatically more threatened, more prone to depression and loneliness than other people. But the good news is we can offset our lawyer personality. We can offset the high skepticism by training our brain to start looking for good things, by training our brain to be more comfortable with the positive instead of ignoring it. We may have blind spots for good things that we see every day, but we don't notice. Little things like that can really help people. Again, in the book, I talk about what you can do, not just to build your resilience, but a lot of the studies that talk about building resilience, the same exact interventions are used to promote wellness. So it's, one-stop shopping. You get two for the benefit of one.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward.
Sale only lasts for 30 days.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading the book, and based on what you're saying, I could certainly recommend to our viewers just go out and buy the book. Well,
and I should say it will be out later this year. It depends on the ABA. I'm still doing some final edits, so it's up to them. So don't rush to your stores yet. You can check with me in, I say, May or June. I should have a publication date by then.
Yeah, we would be very interested so we can let people know when it's coming out. Larry,
Great.
thank you so much for taking your time with us today. And to all the listeners and viewers, if you haven't had the chance to explore the services offered by Answering Legal, now is the time. And while you're at it, check out the information that Becky and I offer for free at legalburnout.com. This is Cindy Sharp and my partner and friend, Becky Howlett, your co-hosts. And until we meet again, just
breathe.
breathe.